Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. This is Francis and Nate. We are back. It is post-Christmas. Santa was, despite the government shutdown, Santa was tracked by NORAD the entire way from the sea to shining sea, tracked, I'm sure, by Minuteman II missiles and Patriot missiles. You got to give the ADA something to do. The air defense artillery dudes don't really get a whole lot to do. So, Nate, how was your Christmas?
Christmas was good. It was quiet. Everything shuts down here for Christmas, and since we don't really have a family Christmas to go to get shithouse British drunk and listen to people yell about how Brexit is a good idea, we actually had a very peaceful Christmas, which is nice. It's also not as cold here as it is in New York or the Midwest, so it's weird to be like, oh wow, winter, when it's like almost freezing but not really, as opposed to Indiana where I'm from, where my parents have been telling me that it's been like 16 degrees there.
It's horrible.
16 Fahrenheit.
Yeah. So I have a question. In England, are the Chinese food and movie theaters all open on Christmas, or do those close too?
I got the impression that those were close too. There were a few places in our neighborhood that were like like takeaway stands and vegetable stalls and things like that were open, but even the stores that are normally open like late on weekends when everything else is closed, most of them were closed. There were a few things like halal butchers and stuff where obviously like them staying open on Christmas is not a huge encumbrance and also probably good for their business, but it was, I mean, there's no buses, there's no public transit, there's nothing on Christmas. It's very closed down compared to, and certainly compared to New York where it's the whole joke is that like, you know, everybody goes to the movie theater or goes to Chinese food on Christmas.
It's wild that they shut down the public transportation too. We had buses running on Christmas all the time.
Yeah, they definitely don't do that, and I think they close them for New Year's Day as well. I mean, also here, some people have the day after Christmas off because it's also a holiday here.
Yeah, what the fuck is Boxing Day?
Look, man, I just know Boxing Day exists. I don't know what the origins of it are. I know that as a kid, we would go do Boxing Day things with British relatives and friends. Like the one thing I would say about Boxing Day is that my experience, at least, as a American-born child of an American and an Americanized British parent, but also living in Europe as a kid, was that like you really didn't do anything with your neighbors or friends or anything on Christmas Day. Like that was less common. In Germany, especially, was Germany like fucking everything closes down. But on Boxing Day, that was normal. We'd get invited over for friends' places, you know, for dinner and things like that. So like Christmas, you spent with your family. It was really quiet. There was nothing going on. And then Boxing Day, like some people would go and like hang out with friends, that kind of a thing. But what the origins of it are, your guess is as good as mine.
I'm sure somebody can Wikipedia this, but I'm not going to do that in the middle of the show.
I mean, it is a podcast where we pretend that we know things, but
no, it's more fun this way. It's more fun to have people slide into my DMs and call me a dipshit later on.
Exactly.
So last week we did our Jarhead release, and a whole slew of stuff has happened since the last time we actually talked about military current events. So we're gonna tackle a couple of big things here. First off, our most recent, our illustrious Orange Goblin, who went to Iraq. He went to Iraq for Christmas and then stopped off at Ramstein Air Base, and at the Air Force, all the Air Force people were out with their MAGA hats and their Trump flags, flapping them around. And I don't know if you all know this, but that's technically illegal for us to do in uniform.
Yeah, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, you're basically signing away your right to be a political being when you're in uniform, and that's in a lot of ways that's done to minimize what you might describe as political, I don't know, patronage within the military. Which is not to say that it doesn't happen, but overt political statements are, by doctrine, by rule, are banned. That's not to say that it doesn't happen a lot, especially when there's a Republican president. But the complaint here was that this is another example of people being overtly political, doing things with a Republican president in uniform, which is then turned around and used as Republican propaganda. Whereas let's just say, folks would lose their goddamn minds if someone in uniform were to profess support for the Democrats, for example?
Well, I mean, not just profess political support, but it's support anywhere. There's a local barbecue spot called Pappy's that if you go to lunch there in uniform, they will pay for half of your lunch for you. And they were going to be on some new Food Network show, because Pappy's is really really popular and well known in St. Louis and in barbecue in general. So they asked me, they're like, "Oh, you're in uniform. Would you be able to, we want to have soldiers in the background. We'll give them, a free meal if they show up in uniform and everything." So I go back to my unit and I say, "Hey, everybody, on this day, you can go get a free meal. All you got to do is sit in the background while they shoot the thing. They might want to talk to you, Bob, just letting you know." Now, as a public affairs person, I know that this is perfectly fine because it's a dinky little show that hasn't even aired yet. It's like some bucket list, show that hasn't even aired yet on Food Network. But like, I ended up getting pulled aside by JAG, like a JAG officer and a JAG NCO. They're like, "Oh, you can't do that. We can't have people, supporting this barbecue place in uniform." I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Of course you can. Anybody can. I can be in uniform and be like, I love McDonald's, and I love a Big Mac, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that." The Hatch Act, which is what we'll get into, which is what covers these provisions. The Hatch Act specifically says that I can't go into Pappy's and be like, "I love Pappy's," and the U.S. Army loves Pappy's. That is where our problems lie. It's perfectly okay for me to like a thing in uniform. It is not okay for me in uniform to go and flap flags for it and everything if it is an overt political statement like that. Out of uniform, all good. I can do that all day. It's not an issue. So of course I rolled my eyes at my JAG and on the side let a couple people know. So I hope they ended up getting free lunch. And I was just like, just don't say anything dumb about how like the Army loves Pappy's. And they're like, "Why would I say that?" It's exactly. I don't know. You wouldn't, because nobody's that fucking stupid. So I'm not worried about you doing it, but I'm obligated to tell you not to do it.
But I think that there was something that this brings back is the extent to which the military is cautious about things like that, or that leaders feel they ought to be cautious about this, to the point where they very aggressively police these things, even when they're what you were just describing, a local business that wants people in uniform for a photo. And similarly, I mean, there have been things in the past that we've talked about on this show. I mean, the Air Force Master Sergeant who was re-enlisting and did the ceremony with a hand puppet and got nuked for it, got her career ruined, got her boss's career ruined for that. Good friend of the show, Spencer Rapone, host of Eyes Left podcast, who tweeted some rude things about military leaders on his Twitter account, and also had a photo of him wearing a Che Guevara shirt and "Communism will win" written in his hat, which got a big wet baby of a U.S. senator involved to cry about it. Basically, these are either, in one hand, political statements. I mean, Spencer's statements were both political and just generally him being rude about the military. He was talking about communism as an idea, though he wasn't saying like vote for the Communist Party and they're this person by name. Similarly, the Master Sergeant in the Tennessee National Guard or Air National Guard was just doing a thing that was perceived to be unprofessional, although it was meant as like a thing for her kids. So in both those cases, the military came down hard, not because of the perceived political implications of any of these statements, but because they offended the general sensibilities of the military, which to me is something that I've struggled with over the years, which is that it's very hard to say these rules are in place to make the military apolitical when you and I both know that the line is drawn far more strictly for someone who's trying to profess support of anything that might be left of center, even 1 degree left of center, as opposed to if you are a Republican, if you're a right winger, you basically you will only get in trouble if like the 4th time you disobey a direct order from your chain of command to stop shit posting about Obama, they catch you. Like it takes a lot. It takes so much to get in trouble for being right wing in the military. And it does not at all if you're basically even a Democrat, which as you and I know is actually being center right, but It's the enemy because it's the
Yeah,
libs.
I mean, come on. We see it's hard enough to kick Nazis, like professed white supremacists and white power people who are, by definition, ultra right wing. Those people can generally like fly under the radar, and it takes, a little bit more than, there's going to be some warnings before chaptering paperwork starts. Which is how it always is. Like, a commander very rarely comes like, oh, that guy's a white nationalist, we need to get him out right now. There's always like, well, let's, just don't put that your Keck flag or your Groper flag or your Nazi flag up, so don't put it up so big.
Well, we need a pattern of misconduct. He hasn't committed a second Holocaust yet. He's just talked about it.
Now, the Confederate flag, though, you fly that all day long. You put that on the back of your pickup truck. You put that in your room. Fucking find a Texas troop and soldier, and you're gonna find, if not him, he knows a guy that in the military that has a fucking Confederate flag. So that it seems like that the military doesn't like to, like, when there's something that's like, it's silly, like the Air Force, the dinosaur puppet thing. It's silly. Like you said, it goes against these perceived sensibilities, and it goes against the idea of like, oh, maybe we could have fun in the Army. Like, and I know that every time somebody thinks that, we all need to come out with baseball bats and bludgeon them to death and make them go pick up cigarette butts in the parking lot, because those kinds of things are not allowed, and they're not spoken of in the military. Having fun, enjoying yourself, unless it's mandatory, unless the commander decrees it's time for fun, and then we can all go have fun. But yeah, But I'd
also say too that, I mean, be a woman who does anything in the military that's perceived as not being like deferential and also chest thumping, and you get the online veteran freak out, undiagnosed bipolar disorder assholes losing their minds, basically saying that, banging on the door of every social media platform for every chain of command in the military, telling them to punish this person. I mean, I do think that in this case, I look at this photo and I'm just like, the captain doing this, I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You know better. And then the next thing I think is pass a goddamn PT test, all of you, But I mean, it's the Air Force, so their PT test is like walk with a stern expression for 1,000 yards and you passed.
Yeah. Now, the military.com did put out a story that the Air Force said that there was no impropriety. Now, specifically, it says there was no impropriety with the guys that showed up with MAGA hats getting them signed. Because, like, well, that's personal property, and they, getting things autographed by a president isn't a problem. Which, like, okay, like, if, somebody had a, Obama Hopi Changey poster or whatever, and they wanted to get it signed, I can understand that. But it really all hinges on this one female Air Force captain who literally just pulled out a Trump flag and was waving it. And when she noticed that she was getting her picture taken, she dropped it because she knew she was wrong. She knew that what she was doing was fucked up. And the response to this is a lot of people, one, calling CNN snitches for diming out this captain, or two, saying that this used to happen all the time with Obama, which it didn't, because I don't know if y'all know this, but the military is very, very right wing, and not everybody was a big fan of Obama. I heard a lot of very unkind things said about him, which I know we say unkind things about him too, but we say it out of a leftist perspective, not out of a right winger perspective. But
also, you're not in uniform when you're saying it. You're a reservist.
Exactly.
And you literally are allowed to do this when you're not in uniform. I didn't do this when I was in the military. I never commented on DoD policy or on the chain of command, which, believe me, annoyed the hell out of me. I wanted to comment all the time. I wanted to say a lot of things and directly correlate them with my name and my experience in uniform to be like, this is so dumb. Why do we still do these things? But you have to shut your mouth, otherwise, you've got the stupid rules, and you and I can agree that the rules are written to be selectively enforced, but that doesn't mean that you can't pretend the rules don't exist when they're making your life hell using the military, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And in this case, I think, like you just said, the captain particularly, she must have known she was doing something wrong. But I also think that it's funny to me how there's no impropriety when this happens. But like you said, if there were to be, I mean, all right, the hypocrisy argument doesn't really do us any favors because everybody knows that they're hypocrites. Like you don't win points from the hall monitor by pointing out that they're hypocrites. And I think something that to me gets to the heart of this, why liberals have gotten mad about this, why veteran Twitter has, to some extent, the liberal wing of veteran Twitter has gotten mad about this, is that, okay, the captain aside, because I think we can agree that that's wrong. Why are people freaking out? Because Trump has said overtly white nationalist shit that you're supposed to get punished for in the military if you say it. And he's the president. He's the commander in chief. Like, that's the thing that's making people lose their minds, is that this guy and his stupid hat and all the shit that he stands for, all of the wrong ass shit that he's said, that he's told people, that he's tried to implement in the United States using his weird, freaky fucking Slender Man underlings, all of those things are so offensive. And I agree, they're offensive. But the problem is, he's also the president and thereby the commander in chief, and thereby the law, the rules in the military are treating him like they would any other president. Now, that doesn't really necessarily make me believe in institutions, but
I would also bring up that, that a big issue that we have is it's very obvious also that, like, I cannot understand anybody who's in the military who is pro-Trump at this point. Like, either you're not paying attention or you're like in SEAL team and you've got a boner for killing people. Like, there's nothing else that makes sense, because like like right after all of this, he went out and was just like, I'm gonna give the military a 10% raise. Y'all have never had a raise in 10 years. And it's like, none of this is true. All of it is a fucking lie. Like, not a fault. It's an outright lie, and he's been doing it for 2 years. He's gutted.
I love the idea that the commanders have to pull their soldiers aside afterwards and be like, "Don't listen to anything he said. He's a fucking moron." Oh, he's also the president, though.
Right? We have to listen to him if he sends us into a ridiculous war. However, with this thing, no. We're not discussing that. You're not going to get shit. In fact, the government shutdown, you might actually not get paid. So we'll discuss that later. Yeah, but with VA privatization, looming, Trump allowing 3 dipshits from Mar-a-Lago to like make VA decisions, like have no military experience, no VA experience whatsoever, just like 3 of his fucking golfing buddies, just like, what if we did this shit? All right, make a policy, I guess. I cannot imagine anybody in the military, who does still have, and like the people who I do talk to in the military who do support President Trump do so with a, they're like, it's kind of that, do you support Trump? And there's that like heavy sigh, and it's like, well, so you can tell that it's not, not everybody who is a conservative or Republican in the military is 100% behind Trump. But there certainly is there's a step away kind of happening. But then you see these cheering fans that come out here, which, as I've said on Twitter, you don't have to go meet the president if you don't want to. Fucking Donald Rumsfeld came to Afghanistan. I ended up meeting him. Well, I didn't meet him. I ended up going taking photos of him, but I was just like, I don't want to fucking meet that guy. Fuck him. And they ended up sending me because our other PAO was sick, and they needed somebody to take a picture. But, for the most part, you can get out of these things. So all these people that wanted to go see him, that are standing up there cheering and shouting and everything, are Trump supporters and they're smiling and they're laughing like, oh, my president's here. And like the idea that, like, I feel like we've gone beyond the whole, well, you have to respect the office of the presidency. You have to do this, you have to do that about, because you have to respect the president because they're duly elected, head of the state. Like, we can see that that's all stupid bullshit now. We should have known it was, smart people have known it's stupid bullshit, but now we can kind of see everybody else is figuring that out as well. So this is what this is. These are all people who want to be there, who are bringing MAGA hats that they own. I imagine they didn't run to the PX and buy them, that day. They're in Ramstein Air Base. It's in Germany. Somebody has a fucking Trump flag. Like, the other thing that it could be is that somebody in the Trump campaign could have just been handing this shit out, which is also illegal. That's a fucking campaign stop now, and I don't know why I'm footing the bill for his campaign stops if he's out there just handing out, firing from the fucking t-shirt gun, the Trump branded t-shirt gun, MAGA flags and shit like that. So I don't know, it's...
Well, also something I'd point out too, just to jump in, I've heard a lot of people making sort of apologies for these people and saying they're forward deployed, it's the holidays, they're away from home, cut him some slack. Particularly, I'm thinking of John Noonan, a guy who looks like. Actually, you know what? I'm just not going to comment on his appearance because I don't want to be that person. Particularly from John Noonan, a guy with the street smarts and the wherewithal to work for a smart politician on defense policy, Tom Cotton. Anyway, that should speak enough to his character. I see these things and I think to myself, number one, they know better. Number two, who cares? Number three, Germany's not a deployment. Number four, they live there with their families. And number five, why do you have to make excuses for people? People will do this when it's someone who they support their politics. And I mean, I'll be honest, when the Spencer Rapone's thing happened, I absolutely agree with everything he had to say. I also wasn't surprised the military did what it did. And my argument was, don't treat this as anything worse than you would treat a situation from the opposite side. I had soldiers who said dumb stuff about the president online. I had junior officers who said dumb things about the president online because they didn't like Obama. Give them a counseling statement, but don't kick the guy out of the military if he doesn't, but that's what wound up happening because sexy boots senator from Florida, Marco Rubio, got involved. And, once that happens, it spiraled out of control. But also because the military is a right-wing institution staffed with complete idiots who got their politics from Rush Limbaugh in the 90s and have never grown out of it. Anyway, comments aside, you do witness the hypocrisy and the double standard. And I don't necessarily think there's anything good about pointing out the hypocrisy, because if by almost year two of Trump, you haven't figured out that they're hypocrites, you're either not paying enough attention or you're in way over your head. And so when I think the one thing that I would say about it, that I watch this happen and see the sort of hand wave they're giving to this MAGA troop bullshit, is that it's good to see this, because it's good to see the people that might otherwise be able to hoodwink you into believing that they are worth taking seriously on any other topic. And if on a thing that's so easily a softball, that's so easy, like to just say the thing that needs to be said, which is don't be a fucking idiot and break the rules about politics in the military. If they turn around and they'd be like, oh no, your liberals are just snowflakes, then you realize that that's what that everything else they're saying that's couched in defense policy is the exact same thing. They're Trump people and they're going to do whatever they can to lick the boots of dad, and they're not worth taking seriously.
Well, the important thing is always to own the libs. There's nothing more important than an owned lib. You could cut your dick off, and if it owns a lib, then you are the correct one. Holding your dick in the hand as a lib stands there crying lib tears at your owning.
Cutting off my own dick to own the libs, burning my own house down to own the libs. Yes, it's a proud tradition in American politics to harm yourself in a way that really pisses off your enemy
or destroy
somehow.
Your own property. I love the 24 hours when 500 extremely online MAGA dipshits blew up their Keurig coffee makers over Keurig thinking oh, maybe we shouldn't advertise on Sean Hannity, and then suddenly they're like, no, we're going to, and then who gave a fuck? But
well, I mean, so the thing that's funny about this is that this has sucked up all the oxygen in military news in the last couple of days. But two other massive things that in a sane world, in a normal world, would have sucked up the oxygen for good reason. Number one, the Secretary of Defense is quitting. Number two, Trump has just decided, just up and because, to withdraw the U.S. from Syria.
Man, it's one of those we sit here and we rally for the end of the forever war, right? And we all say, pull out the troops. We shouldn't be in Afghanistan. We shouldn't be in Iraq. And then Trump says it. And then there's this contingent of extremely liberals who are just this is, who suddenly is well, now we have to back these dipshits that got voted in to continue a fucking genocide in Syria. Now, Syria, as best said by the Australian genius Matt V. Brady, the shape of the country Syria is actually a madness rune, and the longer anybody stares at it, the crazier they become. So I don't want to go too much into the politics of Syria because I'm sure I don't know shit, and so I'm just going to leave it at that. But I will say that however Trump is going to do it is probably going to make things a hell of a lot worse. just by tweeting it rather than, having any kind of lengthy policy discussion about it with people who fucking know what's going on. This is why Mattis quit. I'm not a fan of Mattis. I think Mattis is a war-humping dipshit himself, but if you manage to piss off Mattis about something like this, it's incredible. If Trump losing Mattis and Lindsey Graham is kind of huge on this one. He really fucked up.
I think Lindsey Graham is right back on the train.
Yeah,
though. Lindsey Graham.
He wants the fucking wall for him. But for a minute, Lindsey Graham was just Mr. President, how dare you not kill people in Syria? Now,
yeah, I think the once again, madness rune rules apply. I would say Mattis is bad and has been bad, and the reason why Mattis is bad is because Mattis represents a kind of military Praetorianism that wants to be impervious to civilian influence and believes the military knows best no matter what. And if Mattis didn't quit over what happened with baby prisons, if Mattis didn't quit about them betraying all those people that were getting immigration papers taken away, the interpreters that they've been fucking over, who were enlisted in the military, if Mattis didn't quit over the military being tasked to build the wall, to go and do this useless deployment on the border, all these things Mattis could have quit for. If the thing that he quits for is that the Trump is unilaterally pulling us out of Syria, that to me seems to indicate that that's the thing that he can't stand, is the military being told what to do by a civilian leader. And it sucks, but I for one, I think that chaos and inertia are always bad in government. And so what you're getting with Mattis. Mattis didn't care about the transgender ban. Mattis didn't care about the comments made about the military. Mattis didn't care about the comments made after Charlottesville. None of that bothered him enough to quit. This did. That tells you a lot. But also, by, like I said, almost year 2 of Trump, having seen this stuff happening, you can just presume that whoever replaces him is going to be worse. And at this point, more of a Stephen Miller type of shitlord than someone with any ostensible, I don't know what's the right word, credibility with everyone outside of 4chan.
I think the GOP Twitter account said that the incoming UN secretary is qualified because she's visited 26 countries, which I visited half of those. So apparently I'm half a UN ambassador now. I don't know. There's not this is the problem. Trump has
Mm-hmm.
beaten normal people. He's beaten their brains into such a fucking pulp at this point that Mattis resigns and I say, good, fuck Mattis. And they're just but Mattis this, Mattis that, Mattis, kept it so that that Eric Prince didn't take over the war in Afghanistan. Mattis did this, that, and the other things. Fucking Mattis's last job was on the board of directors at Theranos. If that fucking tells you anything, either he was stupid enough to be in that, or he was in on the grift. I don't know which one he was, but that's Mattis for you.
Am I worried that Turkey is going to jump in and massacre the Kurds? Yes, I really am. And I feel like Trump is basically just giving Erdogan the green light to do that. Am I worried that whoever is going to replace him is worse? Yes. Am I worried that that the next person might just be a solely political appointee who doesn't know anything about the military, and it's going to be the Mar-a-Lago drinking buddies cigar club for the VA, except for the military? Yes, all these things are concerns of mine. But at the same time, I'm not going to induct a guy who was okay with all of the things Trump has done into the Resistance Hall of Fame. You know what I mean? That's just not how it works. He was okay with it until it personally offended him, and that should tell you that, much like John Kelly, he was on board with being awful to immigrants. He was on board with being awful to queer people. He was on board with all of these culture war dipshit things that Trump's been doing. It doesn't bother him. And okay, maybe deep down his conscience is such, but he feels like this is the higher calling. Great. The higher calling moment was to quit when Trump said that Nazis were fine people when they murdered somebody in Charlottesville, Virginia. Yeah, I'm sorry, man, but it's just too little too late at this point. That was almost a year and a half ago. Like, what the fuck were you doing? What you knew what you were doing when you got into it, and the first 6 months confirmed that.
Yeah, and I got really tired of the whole adult in the room Mattis Kelly. Like, nobody takes that job like without seeing their own like agenda and ego in one way or another. And we can go, I know Task and Purpose did a story about Mattis covering up obvious war crimes, and I got no sympathy for him. I mean, he's quitting his high paying job, and he's going to go back to his retired general pay. I don't give a fuck. Mattis can eat it.
Well, yeah, likewise. I think that, so this is something that we've talked about to a great extent on this show, and that I feel warrants mention once again. The problem with the belief that institutions are going to save you and hold the norms in place is that, for one, it doesn't take into consideration that institutions, especially institutions like the military, are made up of people who have a vested interest in not rocking the boat lest it ruin the thing they've worked for to get to this point. Whether it's not a private not wanting to have his pass revoked, to someone on the cusp of retirement or a big promotion not wanting to lose out on that. Specifically in an institution like the military, where not only does it lean conservative, but it gets exponentially more conservative with each rank that you ascend, it seems like it's a very childish, or at least very naive interpretation of events to look at the kind of people who have been 4-stars, who saw the invasion of Iraq, saw the complete nightmare afterwards, saw them screw up the occupation, saw them make these terrible decisions across the board, saw things like the overt corruption, the whole travesty of the Coalition Provisional Authority, saw people day in and day out watching soldiers and civilians dying in Afghanistan, and still pumping out this kind of nonsense analysis that showed that made people think we were going to win these wars when we're not. They've gone their entire careers at this point having to pretend that a problem that's so massive and obvious doesn't exist, and just make up, chipper sounding AAR bullet points to support an analysis that is farcical. So the idea that when you think about how much dumb shit you have to either parrot or believe to get to that point, that person's going to turn around and they're going to go Smedley Butler. Like, I hope, me too. But man, like, chances are really, really slim that that's going to be the case.
Yeah. And everybody's got a profit to make off of this stuff, one way or the other, whether it's monetary or clout or whatever.
Yeah. And so, to me at least, look, one of the things that's weird to me is that, so I was in the military under Bush in the very beginning, and then I was in the military under Obama for the entire rest of my career. And so I didn't really see a lot of the furore that would happen when people would say anything even marginally critical of like the way the war was going, and then they'd get nuked by their chain of command. Like, famously, I don't know if you remember this story, but Donald Rumsfeld had that press conference, and that Sergeant First Class asked him about, body armor and up armored Humvees, because, and then they nuked him. They ruined his life over that. Another time, Rumsfeld had a press conference where a soldier asked him, I believe it was a soldier asked him, said, the media is bullshit. They're lying. We want to write about what we're seeing, but we're being told that, like, we can't blog, for example. We can't talk about all the positive things we're doing here. And Donald Rumsfeld said, oh, well, I'm sure there's no problem with that. Like, I don't see why there's any reason not. But like, the truth is, they were expressly forbidden from doing it. It was like people were getting investigated over it. It was massively, what's the right word? It was massively controlled. And so I didn't experience that because I was a cadet at the time. And then, I became an Army officer. But what I do remember was, if you were critical of President Bush, you could expect like vitriol and acrimony, and you'd be the only person in the room who was critical of it. Everybody else would just basically be like, hey man, fuck you. Why are you even here? You lib, you coward, etc. under Obama, people were pretty overt in their disdain for him, regardless of whether they were dialed into politics or just like your average shit dick hater who just has an opinion. And it was striking to me how the people that I knew that liked Obama, it was like being a Freemason, like you didn't talk about it with people until you'd like suss them out. Like I had a friend who had like a kind of semi-joking Obama, like it just said Obama Rama, what's it called? Air freshener in his car. And so like, if you saw it, people might think you liked Obama. They might also think you hated Obama. And I asked him one time and he's like, yeah, I just kind of use it to figure out like whether or not people, what their politics are. And if they start saying the N word, then like, I know. And, it turns out he was an Obama supporter. But finding it like, so to me, at least, it's just strange to watch this happen and to see people be surprised that there is a lack of concern or caution when it comes to people overtly supporting the Republicans, Trump, Keck, MAGA, whatever the fuck you want. Those people have always been there. Those people, by and large, that's the attitude a lot of people come out of the military with, either because they had it before or because they were sort of socialized to it when they were in the military. And I don't think, the military that sent dudes to Iraq, having to put sandbags in their vehicles because they didn't have armor plates, the military that the Air Force was basically crying foul, like we're not supposed to fly things like vehicles, those are supposed to go by ship. So all of these like thousands of MRAPs were taking months to get to Iraq when dudes were dying 5 and 6 a day, and they finally had to fire the chief of staff of the Air Force and put in a new person who were like, okay, it's fine, we can load MRAPs on C-17s and fly them. Like the military that did that, do you really think that they're gonna go Mr. Smith Goes to Washington about soldiers with a MAGA flag? Like, they don't care. That's who they are. And I'm not saying that to instill nihilism. I'm not saying that to say we shouldn't enforce standards because if you're in the military and if you're still in, if you're either waiting out your time or you want to be there, like obviously you have to enforce standards. That's your job. If you're not, then you're fucking just taking up space. But I think that the problem I have, the concern I have is I don't like the idea that people think they can just say a few crosswords here and there on Twitter and that the institution will police and protect itself. It absolutely won't. It's full of people who want to be the next Jim Mattis and John Kelly or Stephen Miller.
Yeah, you're not going to, it's going to be hard to find, people like the Marines themselves worship Jim Mattis. It's going to be hard to find people who are anti-Mattis in, anywhere in the military. You'll find them here, but, either people love him or they just don't know that much about him. And it's one of those things where like he got not vilified. He got canonized by so many people for like all these great deeds. But like, can there really be war heroes in a shitty war that shouldn't be happening? Like for me, that's what this ultimately comes down to. I can't really think of a conflict that maybe Desert Storm, I don't know. But also we fucking firebombed a shitload of civilians on the highway of death. So I don't, it's, we're creating these heroes out of these shitty wars that we shouldn't be in. And yeah, you're right. These people, people are going to want to be the next Mattis. They want to be the next, guy who doesn't take shit off of anybody and does, this, that, and the other thing. And you're probably going to find them there.
That's a really good point. That the problem that we're looking at is not necessarily that there are a few bad actors that need to be policed up. That these rowdy soldiers got rowdy with their MAGA flag and we got to fix that and then go back to doing soldier things because the military is a default neutral good. I think you've hit on something really important there, which is that we've watched wars based on lies and falsehoods, like Iraq or Libya. And in the case of Iraq, it's pretty obvious. In the case of Libya, I think it was a kind of military opportunism that went with zero follow through that went horribly wrong. We've watched the war in Afghanistan go from an ostensibly obvious police action kind of mission, which you can justify even if you're someone who disagrees with the war in Afghanistan as it started, basically get twisted into us taking a side in a 40 plus year civil war, and now, basically justifying an endless war because there's no way to win it because we'll never actually effect the change we want to in that country. So you've watched these things happen at every juncture. The 4-star general who is now the Joint Chiefs of Staff or a combatant commander in the U.S. military was at one point a battalion commander, was at one point a brigade commander, was also a company commander. He was a platoon leader. Some of these guys, they were platoon leaders like in the Gulf War, but some of these, the brigadier general, major general rank, or the colonel rank, some of these guys, they're young. I mean, fuck, man. My friends are majors now. What's up, guys? I hope you're listening and enjoying. Like if I'd stayed in, I'd be a field grade. So you think about this war has gone on this long, and at every moment, at every juncture, whether you're a private looking at your first re-enlistment since being in the military, or hopefully you're like a specialist at that point, or you're a junior officer or a senior officer, at some point, you have to over and over again make the decision that you're on board with it. And are you on board with potentially getting sent to a war that you don't believe in or that you don't care about? That's the starter. Next, are you on board with becoming a leader who has to devise the plans for enacting this war that you don't believe in? Next, you're past the point where you can get retirement. You've got it. You've got your golden ticket. Do you stay in to take the next promotion to lead more soldiers? Do you keep doing it? That's the problem with the idea with somebody like Mattis, is that you don't get to where Jim Mattis is without being good at being in the military and also really wanting to be in the military.
Yeah, you bought into it. You really bought into it.
You bought into it. He might not have been the most motivated platoon leader in the world, or platoon commander, as they call them in the Marine Corps for some reason. But by the time that he got to where he is, by the time he was the Secretary of Defense, the man was motivated. I mean, didn't we see some shit about him being like in his office on Christmas Day? I mean, the man was motivated, and you don't get there as a. I mean, I just don't. It's very, very difficult for me to believe that a person who has to put in that much time and effort to get to where they are is going to be a wild card, a contrarian, or a dissenting voice when you have unanimous terrible shit being planned by a corrupt crime president and his weird flunkies. Does that make sense? Like, that person is going to side with the institution. He's going to try to make it work through the institution. If they're going to reject the president's plans, it's going to be by like stonewalling them through the institution. But absolutely, start to finish, what he's going to do is going to be based on the idea that the institution's good and the people directing the institution are bad. And my argument is, at this point, the institution is so thoroughly corrupted from the wrongness of what's been done, of the stupidity and the fallacy and the general inability to learn from mistakes, like the unwillingness on the part of the organization to adapt from mistakes above the tactical level, that it's very difficult for me to look at that and say, okay, this person is going to find a way to make good prevail if such a thing exists. And that's a very, it's a very negative way of looking at it, but I guess once you're a lifer, it is your life, and you don't become a lifer and then suddenly become the contrarian, I don't know, the lone dissenter in the boat. Like, that's a very, very rare thing in my opinion.
I partially believe that Mattis's disgust with the idea of Blackwater going in and handling Afghanistan is, 100, pretty much based in, we're the military, we're the heroes. We don't want mercenaries doing what we do. We can't have the mercs go in and do our war crimes. God damn it, we're gonna do them ourselves. But yeah, I mean, it's like you said, he's bought in 100%. You have to be bought in to do it. And at this point in coming into 2019, I cannot fully believe that you've been paying attention, or that you're not a touch racist if you think that the wars in Afghanistan and Syria and everything are a good idea, and that we should continue to do them. We have always been on the pro leaving, but also the pro leaving correctly, kind of trying to leave some sort of I don't want to say lasting legacy because we've already done that in a very negative way, but at least some sort of like, and this is how we're going to make sure that this place doesn't collapse in on itself.
Yeah, you don't want to leave and have the place become a civil war.
Right.
You don't want to leave and have there be a power vacuum that creates a situation that's more violent and more destructive than what's currently going on.
I'm gonna tell you right.
But at the same
time,
time,
right now, we should be, negotiating with the Taliban and Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. 100%. That's fully believe that because they're the one. Fucking what's his name, Howard Dean, immediately doing but what about the girls? What about the girls in Afghanistan? You want to leave, and all the girls are gonna get killed and sold into child slavery and whatever. And it's like, man, I don't fucking.
It's like, Howard, I've got some really really bad news for you about what goes on in Afghanistan right now.
As we know, you and I have both been to Afghanistan. It's not like our occupation has made anything better for the women, for the girls, for the boys, anybody. It's only made like contractors and shitty regional warlords wealthy.
Well, no, I think the point I would make is that it did make things better in some places, like after the dust had settled in the end of 2001, in the sense that by ending the civil war, there was a moment in Afghanistan where it looked like things would actually be able to stabilize and become, it would return to the pre-1974 kind of chaos. It would return to the stability that it had in the early part of the 20th century. The problem is that yes, it was great that girls could go to school. Yes, it was great that they stopped the Taliban from persecuting Hazaras or any minority group in the areas that they operated in. Yes, it was great that they were doing construction and infrastructure and all these things. But what very quickly happened was the place became so corrupt and so beholden to warlordism, and those warlords and those government figures that basically represent those warlords, they're willing to sacrifice women's rights and minority rights in the country in a heartbeat if it keeps them in power. And so, which is not, I don't think the U.S., I think the U.S. could have avoided an invasion of Afghanistan personally. I think if once we did go in, we could have ended it very quickly and been gone. There are a lot of ways we could have gone about it that would have been different. But I think that saying that now, after 17 years of war and violence and displacement, that we have to stay because otherwise girls can't go to school, or what I think that obfuscates is that the south of Afghanistan is functionally unchanged from the way that it was when the Taliban ruled it. It's in some ways it's worse because there's more opportunities for violence and crossfire for civilians. The places where the change has happened, because I can assure you that little girls don't go to school past a certain age in most parts of rural southern Afghanistan. The things where places where that changed were like in the north and in the central parts of the country where the Taliban hadn't been before, the Pashtun militias hadn't been before. They took over, and then they're like wholesale trying to slaughter Hazaras and banning women from being in public and banning girls from going to school whatsoever. What they represented was basically Pashtun dominance over the rest of the country, and that was absolutely alien to those people in those regions. But the idea that Afghanistan is Sweden now, and if we leave, it'll go back to being some hellhole, like that is such a that is to me a very naive. That's like Howard Dean read The Kite Runner and decided he knew everything about Afghanistan.
He should have read the Flashman series instead.
And also he takes money from whatever that MEK group is, the weird Iranian, fucking crazy folks. Yeah. So to me, you're basically saying, I'm so in love with the idea that we did a good humanitarian thing that it doesn't matter to me how many civilians have to die in service of that lie. And that is such that's full on the DC Beltway right there, but that's also such a gutless thing for a politician like him to say. And, that's why I press against it so hard. And so, I mean, we've kind of gone on a tangent about this, but I think what it really comes down to is, I've said this before, and I feel that in the year of our Lord, almost 2019, no matter if you believed that intervention and military action and counterinsurgency and all those things could have, past tense, could have helped, they didn't. You can't look at these situations and say they worked. They absolutely didn't. Afghanistan, despite our best efforts, has not gotten any better. Syria, the civil war is still going on, and we are in no more of a position to influence but what Bashar al-Assad does now than we were 10 years ago. In Libya, I just saw an article that not only is the slave trade continuing unabated, but they're actually now also taking people from the slave trade to sell their organs. Like, it's an unmitigated disaster. So you look at all these things and you say, this shit has not worked. This has not been successful. If you look at that and you still are unchanged in your thought that the military is by default a neutral good, that the leaders mean well, that the system has to work, that the system will hold, that it'll protect American democracy just as it'll protect some kind of enlightened, noble intentions around the world. If you look at all the evidence and you still believe that, then you are not a rational person. You're an ideologue, which is fine. Be an ideologue, but stop pretending like you're anything but a LARPer.
All right, and I think that's a good place to leave it. What are we doing for the bonus episode this week?
So this week's bonus episode is actually an interview that I did with a friend of mine who is a Chinese American veteran. His name is Jasper Lowe. He's a writer. He's a poet, writer, journalist, and he's got some really interesting takes on what his personal experience, but also in general, the veteran experience of coming back from being in the military and returning to your hometown, which in his case is the Chinese American community of New York City, and what that's been like having to return to a community that's not particularly supportive of military service and also very, very conservative versus the sort of what it's like to be like a New York City veteran writer, which is, in my experience, a little bit more of a liberal or like left-leaning and more or less non-traditional sort of community. So it was a really fun interview. He's also working on a story about the death of a private named Danny Chen. And so there's an opportunity. If you were in that unit from Fort Wainwright that deployed when Danny Chen died, he's trying to write a piece about that and he would love to talk to you. So definitely listen to the bonus episode if you're a Patreon subscriber. And then also if you were in, was it 1st Brigade 25th ID in the 2010-2011 deployment, definitely get in touch because he'd love to talk to you.
We'll make sure that we put his contact information in the notes. So thank you so much. This will be released in 2019. Thank you guys so much for continuing to support us. We also have a newsletter that goes out once a week. If you want to sign up for that, you can check out the notes will have a link to it, but also I'm going to pin a tweet that has the link to it. So, and it just sends out, what our current promo codes are for the shirt, the stuff that we're selling, new stuff that we're selling, quick write-ups about the episodes once a week. Promise not to bombard you every day because I ain't got the kind of time to send that stuff out, but we have that as well. So you can follow me at Army Strang, follow Nate at In These Deserts, follow the podcast at Hell of a Way. You can drop us a line at sergeantjoker@hellofawaytodie.com. And as always, let us know if you have any ideas for some bonus stuff. We'll be doing more movie reviews in the future. Looking forward to that. I think upcoming we're going to be doing Hurt Locker and In the Army Now. So looking forward to watching one of those movies. I won't tell you which one.
Hell yeah, I can't wait to be really, really into one of those movies and really not into the other one, and you can guess which.
All right, everybody, thank you, and we'll talk to you next week.